I'm going to show you how to make and join a couple of the panels in the Santa's Night Out table runner from Kreative Kiwi. For that I've got my 5x7 hoop, some cutaway stabiliser. I'm going to be using transparent thread for the quilting, black sim thread for the silhouette and silver sim thread for the stars. I've got my squizzers and my batting and fabric cut to size. Once I've shown you how to join a couple of the panels, we will pick up again at the end when it comes to turning into a table runner. There's 11 panels to this, so the video will go on forever, and each panel is done in exactly the same way right throughout, so it's not a difficult project to do. You're going to start off by hooping your stabiliser. Load file A into your machine and then stitch round number 1, which is going to give you your placement outline. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it. Trim away the excess batting. You're now going to place your first fabric over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure it. Load your thread for the quilting into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 4, and that's going to stipple the whole of this panel. Load whichever colour you want for the silhouette into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 5. Change your thread to whichever colour you want for the stars, and then you're going to stitch round number 6. Now that that's all stitched, you can trim up the edge, and I'm going to trim mine to about 1.5 centimetres. That gives you enough seam allowance when you come to join the panels together. I've trimmed this up, and we can now put this panel aside. This is the only panel that doesn't have any join stitching in it. All the rest have. Hoop your cutaway stabiliser. Load file B into your machine and then stitch round number 1 for your placement outline. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it. Trim away the excess batting. You're now going to place your fabric over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure it. Load your thread for the quilting into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 4. Load your silhouette thread into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 5. Load your thread for the stars into your machine and then stitch round number 6. You're now going to join these two pieces, and to do that you're going to place one face down on top of the other, align it, and then you'll do the tack stitching. To align it, this is how I do it. You might have your own method, which is absolutely fine. I push pins through key points in the panel, which will be there, here, here, and on the end here. And then I line it up along here. So starting with this one, I'll push this one into the very last hole of the stitch. Then this one will go into here, this one into here, and this one into the very corner here. Now I turn my hoop over, and these pins I bend over, and then I will hold them in place with another pin. I'm going to do that all the way down. Okay, that one down here. And the same for this one, and I'm pulling that down. Okay, now I can turn this over, and I know that all along here is going to align. So now I can pin my panel in place. So I'm going to put one along here. I'm going to turn this over like that. You want to keep all your pins out of the way of the stitch line here. In here, here, and I'm going to put one in here, now remove these ones. Turn it over and remove these as well. I'm going to pop that back into your machine and stitch round number 7, and that's going to tack along here. I've slowed my machine right down for this as well, so you might want to do the same. So now the moment of truth, we're going to remove the pins. And fold this back. And all being well, it should line up perfectly. So now I'm just going to pop a pin back in here just so that it holds it flat. When you're happy with your join, you can then pop your hoop back into your machine and stitch round number 8, and that's going to stitch over this again just to hold it firmly. We can now remove this from the hoop and trim it all up. And that's your first 2 panels joined. These 2 are the hardest. The rest, all you've got to line up is this point here, here and here, and that's pretty easy. But you do it in exactly the same way. You stitch it out, then you will add this piece face down onto the other panel and pin through there, pin through there, pin through there, line it up, push your pins around to stretch it a little bit, hold it in place, pin this in place, and so on. Now when you've finished, trim your panel up and then press it, and this here you want to press open so that there's no bulk. whichever colour you want for the silhouette into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 5. Change your thread to the colour you want for the stars and then stitch round number 6. Load your thread for Rudolph's nose into your machine and then stitch round number 7. I've got my pins in, so now I'm going to push them through into my hoop. Turn my hoop over and pin the pins. Turn it back. Now pin this properly in place. Now remove the other pins from the back and pop my hoop into my machine and stitch round number 7. If you're happy with the alignment of your join, you can now stitch round number 8. You can now free your work from your hoop. Trim up all around the edges and then press your seam open. I'm not a sewer, I'm an embroiderer, but I thought I would show you how to make a table runner, as I've had lots of requests for this. There's probably 1,000,001 ways to do this differently, but I'm going to show you the easiest way that I know that doesn't involve using bias binding. So we've grown our segments into one long panel. And now we've got to transform it into either a tablecloth or a wall hanging, up to you what you want to make. I'm going to show you both things on this, so you have a choice. First thing that we're going to do is cut all the pieces necessary. For your table runner, you're going to need a backing, and you're going to cut that exactly the same size as your front. And you're going to pin it to the front, and you're going to pin it from the front rather than from the back, because when you come to stitch it, you're going to follow this line all the way around. So even if you can't sew a straight line, you're going to be able to for this. The other thing you're going to need is some sides. I'm not doing a bias binding. I'm going to show you a quick stitch and flip method of doing this. And so I've got 2 sides, one for here and one for here, and these are deliberately cut bigger than, or wider than, the panel. Then we've got the top and bottom here, and they are made in exactly the same way as the sides, exactly the same size. And what I've done, you need to decide on how wide you want your finished border, and then you're going to cut your fabric 4 times that width. So for example, I want just under a 5 centimetre border around this, so I've cut my fabric width to 20. The maths is really easy for this. There's, anyone can do this. So I've got a top and a bottom there. If you're going to be adding tabs to hang this, these are really easy. You're just going to measure off. I made this in a strip. I made one big long tube and then cut it to size. But to give you an example of the size, I cut my fabric for one tab to 28 centimeters long. and 12 centimeters wide. Then I fold it right sides together, and I do a 1/4 of an inch seam all the way along. Then I turn it out the right way, and that forms a tube, and then I press it. But rather than pressing it with the seam to the side, I press mine with the seam to the middle. That way it's completely hidden, and if you don't make a very good straight line of the edge, it doesn't matter because it's going to work. So I've made 11 of those because there's 11 panels. And now we come to actually putting it together. Now for sewing this, I'm using my embroidery thread and a matching bobbin wound from my embroidery thread. That way it matches everything, and the thing I like about sewing with embroidery thread is nice and smooth, it goes through your machine easily, and it's nice and strong. So that's everything there to make it. Now let's get on with it. So put your panel into your machine, and you want to keep this stitch line here in the middle of your foot. We're going to start by adding the sides. So I've got my fabric here, and I'll open it out so you can see what I'm talking about. It's cut slightly wider than my panel. It's 4 times the width that I want for my edge, and I've pressed it wrong sides together so that I've got a nice sharp crease there. So now what we're going to do, let me just take that tape off of there, is we're going to place it up against the edge of our panel here. Just going to remove these pins. So you want the crease facing the inside of your panel and the raw edges to the raw edges of the panel. And then you're going to pin it in place. Going to do exactly the same the other end. Fold that over because this is so long. So once again, crease of the fabric towards the centre of the panel, the raw edge up against the raw edge, pin it. I'm going to stitch that in place, and we're going to stitch from the I'm going to turn this over, stitch from the wrong side on the back, and you're going to follow this line of stitching here. If you can get your stitch just a hair's width to the left of this stitch line, all the better, because then that's going to hide all the ugly stitching underneath here. Okay, so here we go with the first side, and here we go with the second side. So this is the stitch line that you've just stitched from the back of your runner. You're now going to fold this out to the side flat, and you're going to press along this crease here. Then you're going to fold this back so that the folded edge comes of the back here comes past the folded edge of the front here, and then you're going to stitch in the ditch all the way along this seam, and you're going to do that from the front. You can of course put pins in here. I'm going to put some pins in now before I stitch it, just to hold it. So, and then you're going to do exactly the same on the other side. Okay, so there's the stitching from the front, and you can barely see it. I've had a little bit of a wobble there, but I can't see what I'm doing because I've got a camera under my nose. And on the back, where you can see it's just caught the edge there. We're now going to do the same with the other side. So that's the front. And on the back, where you can see it's just caught the edge there. Before we can do the top and the bottom, we need to trim up these edges so that they're flush with the top and bottom here. So I'm going to use my quilting ruler here to just nip those off. We're now going to do exactly the same on the top and bottom. Now if you're going to add tabs to make this into a hanger, I'll show you how to do that next. So if you're making a wall hanging, you're going to add your tabs to the back of your panel, and you want to place them in the centre of each of the front segments. So then you're going to pin those in place. Then you're going to add your fabric with the fold towards the middle of the panel and line that up to the edge, and you're going to pin it on the back because you're going to stitch from this side. So you want your pins so that you can remove them if needs be. So I'm going to finish pinning that. My cat's just about to jump into action here. I'm very sorry about that if he makes appearance. No, he's changed his mind. Okay, so we're going to pin that here and then turn it over and then pin along the back. And these pins that are holding my tabs, I can put those through to hold the front, to hold the the fabric. Okay. I'm going to get on and pin that, and then you can catch up with me when we come to sew it. You can now do the same with the bottom. So place your strip with the fold towards the middle, line it up with the edge, and then I've just put a couple of pins along here because you want to pin from the other side. So this is just to hold it. So now I'm going to turn it over and pin it properly along here. And turn it over and take the pins out of this side. So now that's all pinned in place, both top and bottom. Another little job that we need to deal with before we can actually stitch these two pieces on is these ends. Now we want the ends to be neat and folded, so fold your end back so that it's flush with the end of your panel, and then you're going to press it and pin it. You're going to do this on both ends, and then you're going to stitch about 1/2 inch over seam allowance, and then you're going to trim this excess off. That way when we come to stitch this down, the end's neat and you don't have to do any more to it. So we'll start off by stitching those first, and then we'll go on and stitch the rest. So I'm just sewing the ends over now. Little word of advice: if you're going to stitch over your pins, make sure that they lay horizontal and not vertical, and take your time, of course. Okay, so I'm now going to just trim this off. And do the other three. I've got too much fabric and too little table here. I've just removed the pins and I'm just going to trim this excess off as well. So that's one end done. And this piece now I can pin back onto there, and with any luck these two ends should meet up perfectly. Okay, let's do the other end. Pins out and just trim off the excess. Now pin that back onto my runner and do the last piece. If you're being out of shot for a second, I'm just removing the pins. Okay, I can now trim this excess off. And pin this back onto the panel. And I'm going to pin it from the back, of course, because that's the side that I'm going to be stitching on. Okay, we're now going to stitch along this line here and then along this line here, and that will fix these tabs to there, and when we come to flip our fabric from the front to the back, it will then be hidden. All these raw edges will be hidden. I'm going to follow that stitch line all the way along. I've got to pin the wrong side here. I'll just remove that. So now we're going to sew the bottom edge. And that's our two top and bottom edges sewn now. So as you did for the sides, these pieces have been folded round and pinned from the front, because you're going to be stitching in the ditch from the front side. So the pins go on the side of the stitching, and this edge just comes past the stitch line there, and that's on both sides. So we can now get on and stitch in a ditch along the front, and we'll start at the sleigh end. And as for the sides, you're just going to stitch right hard up against that edge there all the way along, and the same at the bottom here. To do exactly the same with the other side at the bottom here. And now we're going to stitch the bottom. It's the bottom stitched. If you were doing the table runner, this would be complete now, of course. You could, if you wanted to, add a round of top stitching all the way around, but you don't have to. If you're doing the hanger, the wall hanging, sorry, then there's one more step to do, and that's to pin these tabs up, and I would pin and press them and then do a round of top stitching around the edge just so that it holds them up. We're going to do that next. I'm going to pin 1 or 2 and then you can join me when it comes to stitching. So all I'm going to do is pin across there on all of the tabs. So all it remains now is to stitch around the edge here, and I'm going to use my foot as my guide, and I'm going to keep the edge of my foot on the edge of my runner. Okay, so this is the top stitching all the way around. And that's your table runner or your wall hanging completed. I hope you enjoyed this stitch along. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new videos as they're published. Do pop along to Kreative Kiwi's Facebook group. There's always plenty of ideas and inspiration there for everybody. And thank you very much for joining me.